You're tuned into Inside Lowell. Inside Lowell podcast brought to you in part by Washington Savings Bank, serving the greater Lowell community for over 130 years. Make the switch now to Washington Savings Bank. Reverie 73, Lowell's #1 cannabis shop. Elevate your cannabis experience at Reverie 73. Hafner's, heating and cooling homes and businesses for nearly a century. Hafner's, it kicks. And by Boston North Company, restaurant and retail solutions for your business. That's Boston North. And now, time for another Inside Lowell podcast. Inside Lowell. If Lowell is your home, this is your place.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another Inside Lowell podcast, coming to you from our beautiful studios here in historic downtown Lowell, Massachusetts. I'm your host, Teddy Panos. Going to be talking some politics today with one of our insiders, Jack Mitchell, joining us here in studios. We vowed we're going to do this on a monthly basis, and then some more added frequency as we get closer to the election, Jack. So welcome. Thanks for joining me here.
I'm glad to be here.
Are you really?
I enjoy this. I think once a month is actually a pretty good frequency, so
every 28 days.
Well, I mean, right. I get to with the full moon or something. Yeah. I mean, it's not like we're not communicating during this whole time. It's just when you and I get to talk one-on-one without the Greek Heinekens involved.
Yeah, we should just start recording our sessions when we're really talking about the interesting stuff, and then we can make a podcast, save ourselves our trip downtown every Monday.
You might be able to get an opera grant to get the Athenian Corner fitted up with cameras and microphones.
I like it. Next round, we'll put in for it. And if not, I have a backup plan that just might get approved. Okay. But last time we did this, we were kind of looking at the council races. They had begun to morph, but there was some last minute adjustment out there, and we went from thinking we had a primary or preliminary in the school committee to barely having any contested races at all. City council got a little bit more interesting on the at-large race with the news that Bobby Tubielli was going to be running for at-large city council as opposed to District 2 school committee. So we got some stuff to look at, and I want to kind of use your expertise of these to break down some of these races. And you've also been looking at the campaign financing.
Yes.
Which is that's what you geeks like to do.
Nerds love data.
So there's a lot to look at there. As you look at the overall race right now, we have 6 of 8 district races on the council side that are a one-on-one race. No primaries, preliminaries to worry about. 2 candidates running unopposed, Dan Rourke in District 1, John Leahy in District 3. You got 6 candidates for 3 seats in the at-large. On the school committee side, 3 of the 4 districts are running unopposed. No challengers for Eileen Del Rossi, for Dominic Lay, or for Dave Conway, who's going to walk into that Belvedere seat as a challenger, Belvedere South Lowell seat. And then also no challengers for at-large school committee. Connie Martin, Jackie Doherty, once they got their signatures certified, voila, they're in for another term. Are you surprised at how quickly this new district system devolved into what we feared it might eventually, with kind of, I don't want to call them ward bosses, but like a state rep type scenario where when the seats, quote, open, tons of people get involved. Once somebody gets elected, to challenge that incumbent now one-on-one, you don't see that very often. Are you surprised that it happened this quickly in the council?
No. I mean, I wished it was different, but at the same time, I don't know if we've developed a mindset amongst the grassroots folks. A lot of the grassroots folks that are activists now have been kind of bought into it's like a quasi establishment, like they're a faction of the establishment. Mm-hmm. So there aren't really any people that are upstarts that are ready to shake things up. So what I see a lot now happening is even the activists themselves, they're getting into this, they bring out their rulers and they measure up the race and they start talking to people. Hey, do you think I have a chance? And when sort of the movers and shakers of the city, that they're kind of, I'll say invested, but I don't necessarily mean like in terms of they bought a counselor using a donation, right? But they've got rapport with the incumbents, right? They're establishing a relationship, a line of communication. If a new person would upset all of that. So it may be, and I'm disappointed, but maybe it might take a couple of election cycles to breed out some new activists that are willing to shake things up a little bit. But if not, the fail safe is we can go back to the charter and we can discuss term limits. Because I had this conversation at the time, right? People were ward boss this, ward boss that. I was like, that remains to be seen. But if it does, and we're getting negative outcomes, then we can let's just look at term limits.
Yeah. You also have the potential scenario that all the activists got really active 2 years ago when you had, in some races, you didn't just have one challenger, you had multiple challengers setting up the preliminary. So I kind of agree with you that this might not be the election that tells us that. I am a little worried, though, that we're moving in that direction. And, part of the goal, part of the game here was to generate more interest, get people more excited in these district races, because you have people knocking doors in a specific district. More likely you're going to have more doors hit than if people have to run citywide. So you look at District 1, Dan Rourke, District 3, John Leahy and Belvedere. If we see a significant decline in the number of Belvedere voters, that could be pretty telling, right? Because usually they show up. They've always had a vested interest in the 9 at-large seats. Mm-hmm. When they had their race last time, there were 3 incumbent councilors running, and then the general election had 2 incumbents vying for the seat that Leahy ended up winning. But the same kind of goes for the Upper Highlands as well. That's a high turnout area. I think we're going to see probably, if we see a significant decrease in Belvedere District 3 and Pawtucketville District 1 from last time, I think that's a sign we're going in the wrong direction.
I would not want to go in the wrong direction. That's not the intention here. The idea that any of the high propensity neighborhoods, and bullshitting around, dragging on the Belvedere, right? Like that's shits and grins. But I don't really put them in any position. They've just voted, right? And but whatever, how many years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was the Highland that was the king shit of everything, right? So these are folks that get out and vote, and they invest in knowing what's going on, and they turn out. I think that if they don't turn out, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're tuning out. It's just that maybe they don't feel an impetus to go. If they feel like the candidates, so we'll just focus on the Belvedere, right? Like they're big enough that they can take it. I'm not going to hurt them from Haverhill, right?
They're okay. We pick on them all the time.
Well, they're and it's changing because some of the older voters are moving out.
Sure.
And expatriates from Cambridge that can't afford the rents in Somerville or whatever, they're moving in, right? And we touch on this. I don't know if they don't feel like they have anybody in the at-large race that they really need to lift. Or maybe they, probably 75%, 80% of voters are positive. There might be some people that are like, I got to make sure so-and-so doesn't get in, right? There can be some of that, but I think it gets more talked about because it's sexy, but I don't think it's really that big of an influence in outcomes.
So to me, that's the interesting part to watch, is because kind of the fail safe here, or the guard that we have in the system against complete apathy because of ward bosses or whatever, is the at-large race. As long as you have challengers in that, you should theoretically have a vibrant turnout in all the districts, right? Is Pawtucketville going to stay home because you don't have the heavyweight Rourke-Elliott battle? Possibly. I don't see that they're going to match the turnout last time, but those who generally vote in Pawtucketville, they should have a vested interest in Vesna Noon and Rita Mercier, the top 2 vote getters going back now for some people's lifetimes. Who gets that seat that Drinkwater is abandoning now.
We do have open seats. We have that seat, and we have the one vacated by Gitzier, right? So.
We're looking at that as a competitive race.
No, but it didn't attract a bunch of candidates, right? Like you were sort of talking about how incumbency kind of casts a shadow over a seat, right? And that's not an incumbent situation. I mean, we could think of, I think we could think of John Dakota as a quasi-incumbent, but it's certainly not an incumbent seat, no. And John's seat is vacant.
Okay. So is the at-large race with the one, I think everyone's pretty much ceded a seat to Rita Mercier and Vesna Noon at this point. I know there's a bunch of folks out there that think this is the year we're going to get Rita. I think they're chasing fool's gold, but you never know, right? But there is, somebody is newly going to step into that role with Drinkwater not in there, even if Rita and Vesna waltz like they usually do. So is it Gitchier? Is it Corey Belanger? Is it the newcomer Virak Oy? Or is it Bobby Tubielli, the guy who came one spot behind last time, 4,100 votes. I know he likes to say that. That's a lot of votes, 4,100 votes. The number last time was 5,200, I believe. Vesna, Rita, and Drinkwater were all over 5,000 votes, if I'm not mistaken, or close to it. So does that number does somebody have to get to 5,000 votes there to fill that seat?
I mean, if we have clear favorites, right? If there's sort of 2 planets and you've got Planet Noon and Planet Mercier that are just going to pull a lot, right? Their voters, who would gravitate towards them? And, I'm not trying to set the 2 people against each other in any way, but let's say they kind of have different centers, right? Someone to go to vote for Rita or someone to go to vote for Vesna, they're going to try to pick somebody out of the balance to come with them, right? And then, what do they do? Although I, without knowing all these people personally, right, I think Rita very much she certainly has a lot of strong city voters or high propensity voters all across the city, right? Because she always does well, but she doesn't do particularly well in her neighborhood, which is Belvedere, right? She might come in 3rd or 4th or 5th, but she comes in 1st or 2nd, right? Except for that weird election for the high school. And I think she pulls a lot of bullet votes. And so there might not be a, what do you call that? Coattail. Rita might not have a lot of coattails. Whereas Vesna, I think that's more likely that if someone's to go to Vesna, they're also looking who can they put beside Vesna to just bolster that side.
I think the Vesna coattails will be more interesting in the district races, particularly District 5 on the council, the Kim Scott, Susie Chun race. I think you're likely to see it there. Can he pull, is it a Bobby Tubielli? Can he drag him along? I can't see Corey Belanger or Eric Gitchier being too much, a favorite in that Vesna Noon camp.
Well, remember,
is somebody positioning themselves in that spot?
Remember that Eric voted to change the language of racism leads to crisis to racism is a public health crisis. So if we're talking kind of left-leaning to progressive voters, the question is whether or not they remember that while they're chomping on the bit about his resistance to ADUs.
God, that seems like ancient history now. Hell, even ADUs may be an old topic by the time we get to November.
Well, I mean, I think candidates like to talk about everything's wonderful, right? Everything's coming up roses. No one ever really likes to talk about the things. Although the high school was a battle. Another thing that kind of interests me is, particularly on the Vesna side, right, is that I've heard young candidates, there's like a core of activists or young operatives, right? And they tend towards the, left to progressive, right? And when asked, some of them expressed interest for being in an elected seat before, right? But then this race comes along, and there's discussions, and just so you know, like there's always a lot of discussions, right? Before people even announce, there's all these conversations, and that's why there's insiders and there's not insiders, right? They wouldn't run against people like, say, Stacey Thompson, although she's very vulnerable, right? Because in part, the Highlands picked her up over Ben Opara when the Gitchers lined up behind her. And they saw a different person as a candidate than they saw as a practicing school committee woman, right? So that support is not likely in place. It might be some, but not to the degree, right? So there was an opportunity there. But the young progressives, these young operatives, they wanted to shy away from that because they didn't want to undermine somebody that they think are kin to them, right? But when it comes to, say, Vesna Noon, I don't know if they're overestimating Vesna's strength here, but now I see a strong gravitation towards Bobby Tubielli. I see a strong gravitation to Virak Oy. I was a little bit flabbergasted when I connected Oy to Sam Mears, who's Trumpian, right? To then seeing a fundraiser with a bunch of these young progressives celebrating Virak Oy. And I was like, how could this be?
He's truly a mystery candidate, because last time we were trying to figure out which side of the Cambodian Southeast Asian battle lines he was on, right? Was he the Vesna Noon camp? Is he on the Ratty Mom / Sokari Chow camp? And I was completely mistaken. I had been told he was definitely not in the Ratty Mom camp. So I just assumed that means in the Vesna Noon camp. Bunch of people watched that podcast, reached out to me immediately and said, "You're wrong." First of all, I butchered his name. I called him Virak It's at Virak Boy.
I just copied you.
Sorry, Virak. I led him down the wrong path, but I have been corrected, so I'm sorry about that.
You think he's worried about his name pronunciation right now?
He might be worried about who we're going to tie him into, though.
Yeah.
But I was told he's definitely not in the Vesna Noon camp, which surprised me. Because I don't think he's tight with Ratty Mom anymore. Whatever happened during that campaign, some of his support, or at least one very prominent supporter of Ratty Mom's, has told me he's not helping him this time. But and then the CMAA angle made me think, okay, that makes sense, right? Riddy Young, Vesna, that's, the CMAA, they've been pretty tight. But I've now picked up some information now. He's not in that camp, and I don't know, is he in any camp? Is he just Virak Oy, brand new face on the Lowell political scene, trying to hop on the council? That remains to be seen. I can't place it, and I'm usually pretty good at figuring out where somebody is. This one I can't place.
So the last time we talked, I spent a certain amount of time trying to create this myth of the Cambodians are emulating sort of Irish politics, right? So we all know, or we accept, maybe we shouldn't know, because these things, it's not like gravity. There's a faction that's, say, Michael Gallagher or John Cox, right? But when did that faction sort of happen? I think it's a thing that almost like a snake skin. It molts itself every once in a while with newer players, but it's something that was established some time ago. And they might even just be some expression of some deeper division that happened a decade or two before, right? Whereas the Cambodians were watching it kind of happen in real time, right? And it's hard to figure like who's who. That's partly why I go to the OCPF. I mean, it's not just nerdy in sense of like I can figure out how much money they can afford to spend on literature or mail or whatever, right? When you look at the donors, you see certain names now, like John Shemley, right, is a businessman that if you have a reasonably good chance of getting elected to anything, Shemley's going to toss something that's just a business thing. He may have personal feelings, and I'm sure he does. He's a Lowellian, like he's been around for a long time, but I don't think he lets that. He doesn't telegraph that through his donating. But there are others that you're like, how does this person? Like, you don't necessarily know how the donations make sense.
So with that in mind, because that does make sense. So there are certain people, if they're donating to one candidate, they're not donating to another. And that divide in the Southeast Asian community is still pretty stark. So with that said, what are we learning from the donations? Who is donating to the Virat Goy campaign?
I mean, I didn't study it like that. Mostly I do run through, and it's kind of like, you pick Coke and Pepsi, and you're like, I know these people are definitely strong, Pepsi drinkers. Why is this one over here with, Coke? I don't get it, right? And it makes me question sort of the generalizations that we make. There are people that are sort of in between, but it makes you question what you think alignments are. Then there's just dollar figures. Anybody, like I was surprised that John Dakota had such a strong fundraising effort. I mean, he doesn't really have much of a race in front of him. Sorry, Ty, but it is what it is, right? But he's fundraising like he's got a race. Now, it's not the 2021 race. I mean, I think, in that year, you might want to have $30,000, $40,000. This year, maybe $15,000 for a safe race will get you what you need, especially if you're running as an incumbent.
And John Dakota's, it's an established name, established family. He's run Jim Leary's state rep race before, so he knows. He's a known commodity, been in the Lowell public school system for a while, heading the Family Resource Center and the transportation and all that. So I'm not surprised that he's been raising a lot of money. Anybody else raising money that's kind of making you go, whoa, where did that come from?
Well, what I saw is not raising money. Bobby Tubielli, I haven't seen anything on his new, like he just sort of resuscitated an OCPF. Maybe it was just there latent, right? But he did an online fundraising event, right? He did a
Zoom campaign kickoff 8 days from today, which is August 14th that we're recording this. Okay. So he was on Sunday the 6th. He had a kind of like a Zoom
in the past, right? Okay,
yes. Yeah.
All right. It was in August?
Yes, it was. It's kind of his first official declaration that, hey, I'm a candidate, even though we had reported it, even though he turned in his signatures and stuff. And he's got a birthday party fundraiser coming up in very soon in the
2 in August.
I think he's doing 2 very early. Yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense.
The one
then.
at the Dragonfly Cafe. There you go, Bob. You're getting a plug for. I'll send you the advertising.
That's Salapoli's place, isn't it?
Used to be. That's the house that Sal built and then sold after all the tax credits came in.
That's a place for all the people that live in those luxury condominiums.
I think all I know is I've been there for a couple of meetings and I see all sorts of people there. It's one of the trendy new places.
Trendy new places. Yeah, we've been yapping about affordable housing, but trendy is trendy. So if those 2 events were in the month of August, it wouldn't be abnormal in any way to not post those earnings or those revenues or what receipts they call them until the end of the month. There are some candidates, and I've seen this in the past, that this sort of like a routine posting that most active candidates, you'll see them post at the end of the month all their receipts, right? I think there might be some statutory obligations to just post by a certain deadline before the race.
Right.
So
you have to show, I believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, how much you've raised every 30 days or by the end of a period, month, whatever that period is. But I don't think you have to disclose who gave that money, who you raised that money from until a certain period. And this goes back to my knowledge of the 2017 election and the two PACs, the Poly High School versus the Option 3. And I remember we didn't get to see who donated to the Option 3. They revealed how much money they had.
Right.
But we didn't see where they got that money from until it was late in the game. I think like 2 weeks before the election or something to that effect. So I'm not well versed in campaign finance law. Somebody will correct us in the comments section.
I don't know the rules around it, right? Like we have friends that know that stuff. But what I've seen in practice is more often than not, a candidate and the treasurer will post all that information at the end of the month, the whole thing. I have seen on a campaign or two ones that sort of hold that information back. And my understanding is it's not illegal. They wouldn't tempt the ire, right? But by not disclosing everything until the statutory requirement, it shows a lack of transparency. It's a little bit of sleight of hand, and it's reeks of sort of cigar smoked rooms, kind of like I know the tricks.
So with the high school debate, there was a reason why that, we discovered when we saw the names why that happened. But I think in these kind of races, was it really that big of a deal who gave somebody 50 or whatever the dollar figure is? Perhaps this is just speculation on my part. You're more in tune to it than not. If people are getting a lot of money from outside the district or even outside the city, maybe that's what they're trying to disguise, or there's special interests that aren't necessarily in that neighborhood. Maybe that's why they might hold back who's given the money, if that's the case once we get deeper into the election season here.
I'm not sure. Like, let's say the UTL donates, right? I don't know if the UTL, because it's an organization, has its own reporting requirements versus the candidate that they provide to. That's maybe not a great example, because in the school committee, they have different reporting requirements. So let's go to the Merrimack Valley Labor Council, right? They may have their own reporting requirements. Unions, like we saw in the state rep race, can't even remember what the number was, the Pawtuckaville one. Do you remember? 16th, right? There was a lot of
how quickly we forget, right?
Yeah,
out of sight, out of mind.
It was living and breathing it right at the time, but now I can't even remember the number. Yeah, the numbers get smaller when you go to Haverhill. You're like 16, 17, 18, I don't know. So there was disclosure, but like there was a lot of some environmentalists. There was a lot of mail, and I think they have their own. Disclosure, right? So, but I don't know exactly how all that works. There's consultants that do nothing but this.
Do those groups traditionally give in municipal elections? Will you see those environmental groups or some of the I know like a lot of the pro-choice groups and stuff were very active in that 16th Middlesex race last fall. Do they generally are they giving to council races?
Yes,
they do, huh?
I mean, I think it takes a sort of a different form. Like I've seen candidates get checks, or but maybe not necessarily like printed literature. What you'll see sometimes is you and me are running in different races, but we're all supported by, say, 350 MA, right? So they'll put out a mail and it'll have your picture with a blurb, my picture with a blurb, and the mail will go out. So the printing cost is this sort of boxed in because they're doing one printer instead of one for each of us, right? But then they just send out the pieces, and they're paying for the stamps. And I guess if you're a 350 MA listener, so to speak, right? They don't necessarily care if they see your face on next to mine, right? Because they just see two people that support the cause, according to 350 MA. That stuff happens. I've seen candidates fill out questionnaires seeking endorsement. Sometimes the endorsement comes with volunteers to come in and knock. The unions will send out, or the special interest groups, whether they're environmental or whatever they are, right? Pro-choice. They'll send out people to just knock and do canvas work. But that does have value. I don't know how they handle sort of what might be considered in-kind contributions.
All right. More to come in our future podcasts on the election topics as we actually start to delve into those numbers. You're watching Inside Lowell, or you're tuned in on one of our audio podcast channels, Apple, Spotify, Google, any other podcast service we're on as well. I'm your host, Teddy Panos. Jack Mitchell is with me. We're checking in on the 2023 City of Lowell election. Jack is part of our election coverage with, we're putting our team together. We got Asa Stutz he's going to be kind of our numbers guy. And we got a few other surprises as well that we're continuing to work on here. But what's going to be the dominant issue in this election? I know we kind of touched on it last time too, that we both think it probably too early yet to have the city manager's contract or future be an issue. I think we're both in agreement. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's perhaps the main topic in 2025. Are you agreeing with me on that?
I'm not sure. I think, I hate to say this, but taxes, because I think there was a certain amount of latitude among the public to say, all right, we're buying into this talking point of kicking the can down the road. I buy into it because I'm pretty convinced, you'd be hard pressed to convince me otherwise. We deferred a lot of investment and expenditures over the years to keep the tax rate artificially low. COVID kind of came around. There was this ARPA money. There was some expenditure, but we also, had some hard conversations about things like firehouses and fire engines and sewer, the sewer lines, right? With the flooding, there was the potholes, right? We have to invest. We have to invest. Plus, the neighborhoods all had now equal footing.
Sure.
All right, and so taxes were going to go up, and I think, the councilors pretty much have bought into this and are supportive, even when they push back. Like if you say, like Eric Gittier is pushing back, but Eric, I think is really more talking about efficiencies than he is talking about savings. Like, sure, he would go down and say, like, let's cut this and cut that, right? But I think really he's really pushing to just make sure that the Lowellians are getting values for the tax dollars that they're paying.
Right. I think the cuts that Eric was looking at would get you to 3.48 instead of 3.5% tax increase. But I'll say this, because you said the word taxes. I bumped into Johnny Dakota a few days ago, and I asked him, said, he had told me he was out knocking doors. He was out there with Jim Leary, former counselor, state rep candidate out in the Highlands. And I said, what are they talking about to you about when you actually have these conversations? What are they talking about? Taxes, he said. Didn't even hesitate. People are starting to say that it's starting to price me out. How much of that is hyperbole? How much is that people just complaining? I mean, is it really the city's property tax that's pricing them out as opposed to 4% inflation or whatever number we're at now? Or I don't know how much stock to put in it, But you can sometimes see people push back and maybe embrace a candidate who comes with a, anti-tax message, right?
That's why they use it.
It works. Traditionally, it's worked.
It also depends on who whose door you knock, right? Like, I talk about high propensity, low propensity. So if you're talking about someone that's retired or someone that is over the age of 50, but maybe they haven't retired yet, but maybe they're looking at retirement. These are people with well-established voting records. They're going to be more concerned with that. If you're younger, you're more concerned about the city that lasts for the next 30 years. If you've got, Bradenton, Florida in your windshield, right? And Lowell's in your rear view mirror, then maybe you're thinking about taxes. So I do think that's a discussion, right? But where you come down on it, whether you want to stop it or you just want to refine it, I think that ultimately becomes a conversation about the manager. So, although I don't think there's sort of sort of a asterisk over Tom's head saying think about him. I think if they see Tom has a shelf life, they want to start figuring out where to go forward and how to go forward. So I would say that the taxes is a big thing. The question is, cut it or just spend it better. Like there was this phrase of you don't want to invest in incompetence, right? I think that's sort of Getier's mantra. I wish he would be a little more succinct when he speaks about it, because he often uses 20 words when 5 words would be good, as Blanche would say. Right. But you don't want to invest in incompetence. And I think the older high propensity voters are cynical and jaded. And so they say, just stop taxes because there's no controlling them. Whereas the younger people are more optimistic and saying hey, I see it done all around Lowell. So let's pay our fair share, but let's make sure we get quality outcomes for the money that we spend.
I think, people are going to accuse me of, being in the tank here, and no secret. I think Tom Golden's doing a pretty good job so far, but I think we're finally starting to see some of that, right? The big fill, the Lord overpass is now all but complete.
That's out of his hands.
Right. That was a state project though. But along with that, we've seen a couple of other bridges open up in the air. The Central Street Bridge was a big one, and I think we forgot, and this goes back to Kevin Murphy. This is before Eileen Donahue. Kevin Murphy sat down with Marty Meehan, then the Chancellor of UMass Lowell, and decided we're going to buy all these bridges from Enel and we're going to fix them because Enel is basically, doing just enough to make them passable, but they're not investing in them. So we've got a whole bunch of these little spans. Now you got, Lori Trahan, Elizabeth Warren, and Ed Markey come to town a week ago, waving a $21.4 million check. So we're going to get 4 more of these bridge projects. And I think when you look back in a couple of years, you're going to say, well, they did invest in it. You mentioned the fire trucks. At some point soon, we're going to see 8 different neighborhoods having their particular pet project or park being fixed because of the ARPA money. And I think we may look back, and ironically, it might come after Tom Golden is long gone from the corner office, but we may look back to this period and say, this was when Lowell did see a kind of a turning point and move into the 21st century, where a lot of folks thought, we're not seeing it, we still got potholes and the bridges are still closed for construction, etc. Am I too optimistic in this, or do you see that potential scenario?
I mean, I like Tom, right? And I don't want to rain on his parade, but it's not hard to be awesome when you have so much money, right? It's easy to be awesome
when you're spending somebody else's money, right?
Which is what Lowell really has been trying to do for the last 40 years at least, right? I mean, when did we bring in the hit it.
I hit the wrong button.
That's I didn't hit any buttons, but so I'm not. You're doing a great job.
By the way, that was Batch and Asa saying it was hot in the studio when they recorded their Power Hour. But hey, look at Jack and I. We could be described as hot, right? There's two women out there who married us and think we're hot, so could be that as well.
Yeah, and yes, I mean I did get a nice new haircut.
Anyway,
in terms of it's awesome. It's easy to be awesome when there's lots of money. But if it's flash in the pan operations, like so we're not going to put. I'll try to put some tipping right up against a wall a little bit. Are they going to be sustainable? Like if he's good, better, right, than the average bear. He won't just give Lowell a vitamin B12 shot. He'll put Lowell in a position to sustain what is being done.
Okay, so that's what we're told is, at least in theory, that's what he's telling you, what Connor Baldwin told you at the last budget presentation as people pushed back against the increase. They said, listen, we've had some structural things that we have to fix. Another thing that's going to come online, and whether it was going to be at Collie or downtown where it is now, you're going to have a brand spanking new high school in the next 3 years. I'm sorry to my Collie friends, new, renovated, part new, whatever you want to call it, but it's an improvement over what we've had. There's another, nice shiny object to point to. As you say, though, however, will that shiny object have enough money in the budget to repair it when you need to, 3 to 5 to 7 years down the road, you need to start maintaining that shiny new object?
Let's go back to Eric gets here and Robin. Who's Robin? Eric gets here and Corey Robinson, May of last year. I think the phrase that gets here used was, we're building the Starship Enterprise, something like that, right? And I understood his like he's basically saying we are building a state-of-the-art building. And do we have the trades, the budget, the operational paradigm, I guess, to maintain it? Or are we just gonna just let it be here and go?
So we don't know the answer to that yet. The manager says, yes, that's what we're doing. Others question it. And then you have others saying, well, my taxes are going up. I don't care if that school falls apart before it even gets a quarter of its lifespan out there.
High propensity voters don't have a lot of kids in school, right? They might have grandkids in school, but that's a constant battle with when you have an aging population on fixed incomes. They look at investment in the city as, not rewarding to them, right? It's rewarding of others.
So I guess this is used in presidential elections, right? Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Is Lowell better off today than it was 2 years ago? And I know we were just starting to come out of the pandemic.
That's
in
not
2021.
That's not fair.
But
right?
I think 2025, as I said, I think that's the election where we're going to kind of really look at things and say, all right, were all the nice words that the manager had and all these promises, how many got fulfilled? I think that's when we'll know for sure.
What I saw, and whatever, bust my balls about Bernie Lynch. Okay, we were in the shitter. Bernie came in, dug us out of a hole, all right, and made some corrections. Some of them were hard corrections. That kid, Andy Sheehan, cost his job because he was being an asshole as they were walking people out of the building, right? But some shit was rearranged in City Hall. But then when Murphy came in, right back to kind of like whatever, right? And then Eileen, was she really any different? Eileen, I think, just tried to smile her way through her tenure. But I don't know, and I'm sure you could probably pick out something that said oh, that was great, right? Sure, okay, but I saw a letting off of the gas, so to speak, right? We had gone to the gym, we had gotten our muscles right under Bernie Lynch, and then we just slipped right back into kind of the old way of doing things. ARPA, well, I think the reaction to COVID and then the ARPA money And I think Tom being sensitive to the accusation of just being one of the, taking their turn, right? And I think he's younger and probably more savvy, right? Like he's not tone deaf to the newer generation of Lowellians, the sort of, the blow-ins to the grow-ins, the people that have really sort of anchored and become part of Lowell. He's not just brushing them off. So let's just see, whether or not what he leaves for the next city manager.
ADUs, does that have the potential to be a deciding issue? As I look at it, Pawtucketville, it's a hot button issue with the neighborhood or the quasi neighborhood group up there. Danny Rourke's running unopposed. He's a strong proponent. John Leahy in Belvedere, he's running unopposed. He's a strong proponent.
Yep.
Vesna Noon's a strong proponent. I don't think he's going to get hurt by it. Where, do you see this as being an issue in any of the races?
For a nerd, I think I when I see people lined up to speak against, they're all high propensity voters. So maybe Danny's in a safe spot, so he's less concerned about the high propensity voters. Johnny's in a safe spot, he's less concerned. John Drinkwater, not even running, right. So less concerned. Vesna might be in a pickle, right? If older people are sort of, but actually older people are one of the targeted audience. If we keep the affordability issue in the forefront, older people, this is a situation where you can rehab a section of your house and bring your kid in and move into the smaller ADU, right? I mean, that's the idea. So I don't know why it would be necessarily something that people over the age of 60 would be automatically against. I think so the nerd in me says it's an issue because you watch the process. When you see a board, right, come to a conclusion unanimously, and then after the city council had spent a certain amount of the thesaurus trying to say that expertise was important. That's why we didn't put it on the ballot, right? Because who would know more about this topic than the city council? We've really digested it. Well, maybe the planning board, because it's what they do all the time, maybe they have something to say about it. And so the process of the city council potentially disregarding it, and you see kind of right? But is it just...
They're going to disregard. Well, how many of the 7 planning board recommendations are going to end up being amendments? 3, 4 of them? I kind of lost track at that last meeting, but my hunch is you're going to get some of them, some of those recommendations.
Then that's not disregarding. Then that's not disregarding, right?
Isn't it? But the opponents are like, you hear some of them say, all 7 of, you got to adopt all 7 of them. To me, that's a little unreasonable. And I will guarantee you that a good number of the folks who said adopt the planning board things are going to be against it anyway.
That's right.
We know that. Let's be honest.
Moving the goalposts is a thing that we see all the time, right?
So, will it be an issue? I don't necessarily see it. I mean, it was partially an issue in 2021 in Pawtucketville. So when you talk about, Danny Rourke kind of in a safe zone, it was being used against him in 2021. I remember that specifically, and it didn't seem to be the deciding factor in his race.
Yeah, Danny isn't beloved 100%. Like, he's got a very strong sort of base of support, right? But when you see the Elliott Rourke sort of faction, right? That's a real thing. But if you can win with 55%, like you can win with 55%.
Doesn't matter.
I did want to put in that I think it's fine to keep it in the council, right? Because the going back and forth with subcommittees and all that stuff, that's just fractions of the council. So by keeping it in the body as a whole, that allows everybody to speak on it, everybody to vote up and down, and you're doing it as a council. You bring in the planning board to make their comments, make their recommendations, you bring in the public, but do it as a whole. I think that's perfectly fine. What was really getting me to grit my teeth was trying to do it on top of the regular business.
Yeah, that was a I just get that meeting was crazy there. All right, so you brought up Danny Rourke. Let's talk about the issue I think may end up being the dominant issue unless something surprising pops up. Who the next mayor is?
That's an insider game.
It's an insider game, but all right, look at District 5. Kim Scott versus Susie Chun.
Yes.
What's the issue out there? What's the neighborhood issue in District 5 that's dominant?
I mean, I think it's just really an identities politics thing.
It's who's gonna get the mayor's vote out of that district. Will it be Danny Rourke or will it be Vesna Nguyen?
I don't think that matters to most of the voters. I really don't think that matters to most of the voters. That matters to Danny Rourke and Vesna Nguyen, and maybe to Susie Chun and Kim Scott, right?
But isn't that the main reason, arguably, that and I don't know. I have not interviewed her yet to see what her priorities are, Susie Chun, and she's pretty quiet on most issues unless they involve, the squabble within the Southeast Asian community. But we remember that rally at City Hall when it became, when everybody discovered that Sokari Chow had the votes locked up. That rally was about, we're going to take out these councilors that voted for Sokari Chow over Vesna Nguyen. And Susie Chun was one of the 3 featured speakers there.
Yes.
In that race. So, I mean, if she's got other issues that she's running on, she hasn't made them public yet that I know of. She certainly hasn't made them public to us here at Inside Lowell. We're still trying to set up a discussion with her in a debate, but I think
it sounds like you're trying to.
Well, Susie, I've been reaching out to you. I'd like to get it done. But I mean, are you aware of an issue that is there a big concern in South Lowell over ADUs or taxes or whatever?
First of all, I've known Kim a long time, and I like Kim. I'm friends with Kim. I don't have a beef with Susie Chun, but I don't think she's running for Lowell. I think she's running for Cambodian politics. Right? I think this is a we do democracy in Lowell. Why can't we do it in Cambodia? Right? And I'm not against that because I'm sure she's been I don't know, whatever. Like, I don't hear potentially negative things about her as a school committee woman, right?
A couple of times I've met her, nice enough lady. I'd love to actually sit down and talk to her and see what makes her tick. I hear she's got an incredible backstory of really kind of survival in many ways, and not just the typical, having to survive.
But who knows? Kim might have a backstory too. You just like, oh, it's so vanilla. Like, who cares? Right? Like, oh yeah, everybody I know has a backstory, something like that. If you got to crawl through the jungle, to survive, to get to a camp, that's a horrendous story, right? And it's nothing like anything that we've ever done.
But I think Susie's also faced challenges while here, and raising a family and whatnot. I don't want to talk about it without her actually saying the whole story, because I can't do it justice. But from what I understand, she's got, it's a great story to tell. I'd like to hear her say it. And rather than, I don't want to think that the only reason she's in that race is because Kim didn't vote for Vesna Nguyen in the last race. I'd like it to be something more substantive. No disrespect to Vesna. I thought he should have been mayor last time.
I think my point is this, not to try to diminish any particular story, right? Because I know, like, I hear, say, Vanna, right? Vanna Howard. I hear her story and I just drop, I question whether I could do those things, right? But it's really a question of adversity, overcoming adversity, and it speaks to an individual's grit, right? Their resilience, their ability to move past these things and not devolve but evolve, right? And so, and I don't want to put one on a pedestal over another, right? Like, their stories of resilience in their paths and lives we're not going to pick a winner, like, Mickey Ward, right? Like, it's not fair to do that. And so I'm hesitant to go down that.
And look, I'll agree with you, because I think within the Southeast Asian community, you have similar stories. Sokari Chow's story, I've heard, it's, Thai Chum's story. All of the Southeast Asian candidates of a certain age have had some horrific things they've had to survive. You wouldn't know it based on the riff in there. But, to me, the mayoral vote, which really kind of came down to Cambodian politics, is really kind of one of the main things in a lot of these races. Justin Ford sat in that seat last week, and we chatted, and he said, I'm running because I don't think, I asked him what he thought about district representation. I'm going to paraphrase it here, but he said it's worked very well for the other districts. And I honed in on that with a follow-up. I said, well, are you intimating that it didn't work well for your district? And he said, yeah, it hasn't. But the only example he could cite, it wasn't, the schools, the streets, the sidewalks, the fire stations. It was the sister city agreement the sister city motion that Sokari Chow made. So there's still some level of that. And I think that's going to play itself out in the mayoral race this time, even though it's not, I don't believe it's going to, I think the mayor's race comes down to Danny Rourke or Vesna Noon. I think it may come down to District 5, the Kim Scott versus Susie Chun race. Who knows? There some folks, I've heard theories out there, some folks may want to put Rita Mercier out there, given that it may or may not be her last term, let her go out as mayor. She hasn't indicated any interest in that to me. But we'll find out on November 7th or whatever that date is.
She's coy, right? Like, so don't, whatever kind of bullshit you think you got, Rita's seen it before.
No, right. If Rita Mercier comes out and says, on election night or right after, I'd like to be mayor, this will be my last term, and I'd like to go be mayor one last time. It was 20 some odd years ago, right? That she was mayor? It's at the point where her portrait, if you follow the...
Let's not do that.
Let's keep you and James Ostis from fighting over that. But it's a powerful thing. If you're sitting on that council and Rita says, I'd like to be mayor and go out as mayor, it's tough to say no.
If Lowellians are casting ballots based on who gets picked for mayor, I think they're trifling, right? I want to go back to the thing you said about Justin Ford. Because I wasn't paying too close attention. I mean, I sort of discounted his talking point, right? But it made me think, does a district get cheated when their counselor becomes the mayor? Because every district counselor is by default a city councilor, like a at-large counselor, right? A citywide counselor. Because their votes count all across the city. It's not like each neighborhood gets different enactments, right? But the attention of any particular counselor gets spread as sort of they see fit, all right? I think you see Corey Robinson, Kim Scott, Eric Gitzier certainly have citywide vision, all right? When they're putting motions together, right? And be pissed off with me, these other councils, whatever.
Yeah, but they're also fighting tooth and nail for their district. I mean, nobody's put forth more things for a district than Corey Robinson and Senator.
No, but he's also putting things that are this experienced Lowell thing, right? That's a Corey thing, but that's not a Centerville thing. But where that kind of comes from is Centerville deserves to have a certain kind of quality of life and an experience as a resident of Centerville, but it doesn't take genius to expand that, right? But again, the question is, when their councilor becomes the mayor, do they get a little bit gypped? Sort of the old school sort of, go ahead.
No, that's actually an interesting theory when you think about it, because Sokari's so busy, Mayor Chow was so busy, having to go to event after event in the city because you've got to be, quote, the mayor, and also focus on school committee things that, how much is the district feeling neglected? And
well, go to Ryan's counter, right? Ryan Gilday's counter, the Lowell Citizen. How many motions does... And there's a pragmatic sense because the mayor is sort of handcuffed from, speaking from the chair, right?
By far the fewest motions.
Yeah, right? I would, without verifying it, but if you would have bet me $100, that's what I would say, right? John Leahy's probably a close second.
Well, because Belvedere's had everything.
They get whatever they want.
Yeah, they've always had it, so they can wait in line a little bit.
Yeah.
They've already been in the bouncy house like my daughter was. Plus, the other day, time for them to come out and let the other kids play.
I think John just takes some spray paint and circles around it, and then it just gets done. He doesn't.
Wow. There's some real inside.
How you like me now?
Low. So, all right. So, look at that. We went, almost a full hour.
I think I'm good.
Are you done?
Yeah.
All right. You've run out of, you're not holding
No, I've never run out. I never run out.
All right. Well, we still got a couple more months of these to do.
Yeah.
We also have a pod squad to do where we will talk about what I think is the hot topic over these. I think it's going to be over the next month or two, and it may, while the counselors may not have any control over it, they may start to kick and scream and force the manager's hand to do something about it, and that is the relocation of hundreds, if not more, migrant families into Lowell and the surrounding communities. Because we've been reporting on that a lot.
Homeless.
And we still, exactly, while we're still trying to, all of a sudden, nobody's talking about the Elliott Church and the outside of there, because once now, it'll also make ADUs moot. Because, 12 granny apartments and, maybe a couple of college kids sneaking through a loophole in the system is going to be minor to the character of a neighborhood than hundreds of families coming in and those kids going into your schools, folks.
We only cut ribbons on problems that are solved.
Yes, we do. So we're going to talk about that. Pod squad coming up. Jack Mitchell, part of our election team. Thank you, my friend. Thanks all of you for joining us as well. Another Inside Lowell podcast. As we like to say here at Inside Lowell, if Lowell is your home, this is your place. Till next time, everybody, stay safe.